to another episode of Walking the Path of Grief. I'm Di Atherton, certified death doula and grief guide, and in this podcast I chat about all things related to grief, death and dying, which can sound morbid to a lot of people, but they are all natural parts of life and the cycle of life. And it's my mission to normalize talking about them, first of all, and then helping people to understand how grief shows up, what it is, and that it's not something that we just get over. So recently I was having a catch up with a friend. We met for coffee and she asked me what I was doing, and I said to her that the following day I was going to do my grief workshop at a rehab center in a nearby town. It's something I do regularly whenever they have a new intake of clients. And she looked at me and she went like, why? What has grief got to do with addiction? Good question. And there's actually a lot of grief around addiction. And that's what this episode is about. So there's two kinds of grief when addiction is involved. And by addiction, I mean anything. It can be drugs, it can be alcohol, it can be sex, shopping, food, whatever it is, it's something that you're addicted to. So the first grief is around the losses that the addiction can bring. And it often takes a while. So what I do within the workshop is I ask the participants to spend some time thinking about what the addiction has cost them, what they have lost. And there are things like family, relationships, money, obviously, businesses, jobs, but also loss of trust. In fact, on the last workshop I did, one of the participants came to me and he said, the only loss that really has impacted me with all of this and my addiction is the loss of trust. My family and my in-laws no longer trust me on any level, in any shape or form. And trust is one of the hardest things to get back, because the problem is that everybody only sees that person as the addict. They don't see them as the person that they are trying to become or as the recovering addict. And they're waiting for things to go wrong again. So loss of trust is a big one. But there is also loss of identity as the addict. If you are no longer the addict, then who are you? And it's quite a powerful question. And this loss of identity is one that addicts don't often think of. But as the addict, you had a certain life, you had a certain way of living and being. Addiction, as we know, can bring a great deal of comfort. It helps us to numb the pain of whatever it is we're trying to avoid or not pay attention to. And interestingly enough, I'm also an energy healer, and over the years when I've worked with addicts, one of the things they always describe is that it feels like there's a black hole in their heart, like a void, and it sucks everything in and it holds a lot of pain, and they will use the addiction to try and fill that hole. And of course, the addiction only does that for a short while. It takes their attention away from the emotional pain, trauma, or whatever it is that their body is holding. So you've got all those losses that the addiction has caused, but then, so loss of confidence. I remember one participant telling me that one of his biggest losses and regrets was as an addict that he didn't have his 21st because he was so deep in addiction. His family never had a celebration. And within his family and extended family, the 21st birthday celebration was always a big thing. And he never got it. And that he grieves that. He grieves that he wasn't part of the family and he never got to celebrate his 21st. And a couple of the clients, the participants, have also said to me that they grieve the loss of the drug, which may sound to someone like you or me that has never been in the grip of addiction, may sound really strange. But the body, it's a habit, and the body becomes familiar and it becomes comfortable with what is known. And so when you take that away, the body has to adapt and go, okay, well, I don't have that comfort any longer. So what now? So in a way, they almost grieve whatever the loss of the addiction. So it actually becomes quite complex. And I didn't really think about this. I mean, when the rehab center first approached me and asked me if I would consider running grief workshops, I had the same attitude, like, where would grief show up for an addict? But in fact, there's a lot of ways that the grief shows up for addicts. And just like anyone else who has suffered a loss of some kind, they need to deal with their grief and the emotions. And if you've been listening to my podcast regularly, you know that I talk a lot about, with grief, we have to feel the emotions that the body is holding, because the body is holding it all. Even if we choose to ignore it, even if we try and suppress it by having an addiction of some kind, it's still there. Those emotions are still there. They don't go anywhere because we try and ignore it. So it goes back to, in their recovery journey, to allow themselves time and space to process those losses. And we start by first getting them to list those losses and just sitting with them and just feeling what that loss is, what it means, how it feels in their body, what are the physical symptoms. I often ask them we do a little closed eye exercise, and I often ask them to just put their hand on wherever they are feeling these emotions, this loss, where they feel it in the body. Most of them put their hands on their heart, but some will put them on their head or their stomach or their back. But the body is holding it, and they can feel it as a heaviness, as a tightness, as a darkness. It's there. And once they have acknowledged the losses, and some people have, they'll have an entire page of losses, and some will have one or two. There's no manual for you need to have this many losses. For some people, loss of confidence or loss of a job may not have been a loss to them, but loss of trust shows up regularly when I work with recovering addicts. That is something they struggle to get back with their loved ones. And that grief is, you can feel it in the room when we start talking about it. It's palpable. And this is the thing about grief. It isn't this little neat emotion that you can put into a box and go, okay, well, I'm not going to look at that now. It doesn't work like that. Grief, when you have suffered a loss, grief will show up at some point. And even, the biggest loss, yes, is the death of someone. But there are kinds of grief that are more challenging. So someone said to me recently, for her, the hardest thing is grieving someone who is still alive. So a situation where children have turned their backs on parents, or a relationship, someone has ended a relationship with you. They are still around, but you are no longer together. There is still that grief. The death of a marriage. People often don't realize that when a marriage ends, it's a death. You made a commitment. You had a piece of paper that said you were now a couple. If you have children, there's an even stronger connection. All of those are like energetic connections that you have to the person. And going to court and having the decree of divorce and that's it, the marriage is over, doesn't clear the energetic connections that you have as a couple. And and I have a client who had a funeral when her 30-year marriage ended, because she just felt that she could not disconnect from her ex-husband. They were still sharing a house together. She hadn't moved out yet. He still exerted a lot of control over her life. And she was part of a spiritual growth group that I was running at the time. And she decided to have a full-on funeral in the garden for her marriage that had ended. So it's really important that we acknowledge where grief is showing up in our life, and then ask yourself the question, do I need to do something that represents the ending? So, even with addiction, when those clients leave the rehab center and go back into their normal lives, all those things that may have triggered grief are still there. So then it's like, okay, I am this different person. I'm now a recovering addict. I'm no longer an addict. I'm a recovering addict. That takes a lot of commitment and courage to the self to be able to maintain that and not slide back into being an addict. So are there rituals that you can do to say, that's it, I've drawn a line in the sand, we are done? So it can be something like actually writing a letter to alcohol or to whatever the drug of choice was, or to the online gambling. And I always remember Dr. Wayne Dyer, in one of his books, said something that has always fascinated me. And he said, love your addictions. Because there's a lot of guilt and shame around anything that we're addicted to. It's like when you're on a diet and you've been really good, and then one day you go out with your mates and everyone else is having cake. And you go, oh, you know what, it's just one day, it's one piece of cake. But when you eat it, you are generally filled with guilt and shame. And he says, no, if you're choosing like to eat the cake, you eat every mouthful with joy and pleasure. He said, because when you love your addiction, it changes the energy around it and the dynamics, and it becomes easier when you're ready to start letting it go. So these participants can write a letter to their addiction, thanking it for its place in their life, because it would have served a purpose. It would be trying to protect them from trauma or whatever it is that they're trying to avoid. It was trying to keep them safe from that. It's not ideal, but that was the way it functioned. So some of them chose to write a letter and go, okay, like, we're done now, but thank you. Thank you for whatever you did when you were in my life, but I'm okay now. I've got this. I'm prepared to face everything. This is my breakup letter to you. And that is a tangible way. And then you can burn the letter. This is a tangible way of saying, that's it. That's the funeral, the kind of a funeral. We're done. Goodbye. but then you will still have those emotions which you need to be aware of. So it's an interesting thing, grief and addictions. It's quite involved, I've realized. I'm still learning. Every time I run a workshop there, I learn more. And it's wonderful to see the awareness growing in the participants as we talk. They're like, okay, that's why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, is I'm grieving. You know, someone I met there, she stopped drinking 2 years ago, but the end of her 20-year marriage was the result of her addiction. And she's still grieving that. And these big emotions are coming up at the moment. And one of the things that has triggered them is there was a family loss, and the first anniversary is coming up soon, very soon. And it's brought up all these massive emotions, and she's struggling to cope. It's like, I thought I was over this. Like, I'm clean now. My marriage is done. I've accepted that. So we've accepted it on a logical, on a mind level, but the body's still holding it all. So it's like, it's literally about sitting down and going, how do I feel? I feel my heart is heavy. Why are you heavy, heart? What's going on? And these thoughts will pop up into your mind. Remember, your body has its own consciousness. So you are the mind, and you are the body, and you are the soul. And your body has its own consciousness. And this wonderful body of ours holds everything. So we need to give it some time and attention. We can't rationalize, oh, that was years ago, I'm over that. It does not work like that. So waking every day and being aware of how you are feeling is the first step to understanding, okay, grief has shown up again. I'm feeling heavy. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling tearful. Why? Is it mine? Is there something going on around me that's making me feel sad? Is it the state of the world? Or is there something going on in my body? It goes back to that awareness all the time of how you're feeling and what you're holding, and then taking the appropriate action to move from that state to one of peace, going, okay, grief has arrived again. She's come for a visit. Let me put on the tea and let's sit together and figure out why she's showing up today. You know, that grief needs space if we're to manage it in our lives. So if you do know someone who is struggling with addiction or is a recovering addict, just don't be too hasty to judge them, because there is a lot going on in that body. I'll see you soon.